Okay, so we're quickly going to go through the basics of the Spanish-American War. Remembering back to our first lesson, we looked at the explosion of the Maine. People were, well, not happy. Newspapers egged them on. Soon, "Remember the Maine" echoed across the nation. Now, President McKinley was all ready with his response, and Congress gave up $50 million so we could prepare for war. McKinley insisted that Spain agree to a ceasefire with the Cuban rebels and a peace settlement. Spain agreed, but McKinley just gave a shrug and asked Congress for the authority to set the military on the conflict in Cuba. He was thinking war. And war it was. Now, in the exciting spirit of expansionism, we had built up the Navy with 9 shiny new steel-hulled cruisers like the Maine and the Oregon. We became the 3rd largest naval power. Our army, on the other hand, needed some serious help, as it was small and scattered across the West. Volunteers were quickly assembled and trained by old Civil War vets who really liked to tell great stories of the good old days. Just a quick side trip, this picture is of the 10th Cavalry, one of the 4 regiments of black soldiers. They were known as Buffalo Soldiers and had to face discrimination on top of all the wartime's hardships. They were one of the 4 regiments that came in from the West to go fight in the war. With all the talk of Cuba and the Maine, you would think that we would attack Cuba first, right? Wrong. We attacked the Philippines first. On April 30th, 1898, we sailed towards Manila, the Philippine capital. Our fleet was led by Commodore George Dewey. After searching through the hot tropical night, Dewey found the Spaniards in Manila Bay. So at dawn on the 1st of May, the Olympia led the fleet in a single-file line towards its enemy. Before we were even in range, the Spanish opened fire. But we kept going, turned west, and were like, oh no, you don't shoot at us. We brought out the big guns, and boy, we did. "You may fire when ready, Gridley," is a famous line from the battle, and indeed, the guns went boom. Each ship followed a wide circle, blasting their guns as they passed the Spanish ships. We made 5 trips past the fleet, a gunner on the Boston wrote. Just 2 hours after the beginning of the battle, we hauled out, and withdrawing a few miles, the order was given for breakfast. I was exhausted from the heat, loss of sleep, and lack of proper food. I went up on deck. Below, the thermometer was at least 116 degrees, and the fresh air was a great relief. From this vantage point, I could see the destruction we had wrought. Dewey and his fleet destroyed every one of the Spanish ships. When news of the stunning victory reached home, Americans were ecstatic. Dewey, the conqueror of the Philippines, became an instant national hero. Stores filled with great souvenirs with Dewey's image. Not many knew where or what the Philippines were, but those awesome newspapers told them the islands were something to be happy about. So, Dewey's victory at Manila Bay cleared the way for U.S. troops to land in the Philippines. Filipinos wanted freedom from Spain and helped the Americans fight for 2 months. They were led by Emilio Aguinaldo. Now, back to the Caribbean and Cuba. War in the Caribbean began with naval blockade, sealing the Spanish in Cuba. Dewey had demonstrated the strength of the Navy, but, as I said, the Army was more like a Raggedy Ann doll. Some small, shiny pieces that were the trained force, and then a whole lot of raggedy volunteers thrown in. Now, one of these volunteers was Teddy Roosevelt, who left his job as the Assistant Secretary of the Navy to fight in the war. His regiment was a volunteer cavalry group that called itself the Rocky Mountain Riders. It it was mostly made up of cowboys from the West, though there were a few Indians and wealthy polo players from the East thrown in. Those ever-printing papers called the regiment Teddy's Terror. Its commander was Leonard Wood. Roosevelt served as lieutenant colonel. They became the heroes of the most famous battle in the Cuban scene of the war, even though they played a pretty minor role. It was a full charge up Kettle Hill, near Santiago, on July 1st. They made way for the infantry. San Juan Hill was a victory. 2 days after San Juan Hill, the Spanish fleet tried to escape the American blockade of the harbor at Santiago. It was destroyed. Then we invaded Puerto Rico. The island was conquered, and the war was essentially over. Spain agreed to an armistice. We fought for a total of about 4 months and lost 385 soldiers in battle. More were killed because of disease. Compared to the Civil War, where tens of thousands were often killed in a civil day, this was pretty insignificant. Thus, it was described as a splendid little war. Roosevelt returned a hero. He was nominated for the Congressional Medal of Honor. His popularity swept him to the governorship of New York. Like Dewey, Roosevelt's stuff filled the shops. One of the more popular items was a cuddly stuffed animal wearing a bandana and glasses. People called it the teddy bear. The U.S. and Spain met in Paris on December 10, 1898, to sign the Treaty of Paris. Spain freed Cuba, turned the islands of Guam and Puerto Rico to the United States, and sold the Philippines to the U.S. for $20 million. The treaty sparked a huge debate. To annex or not to annex. The real issue was imperialism. Some felt that the treaty went against the Declaration of Independence by denying self-government to the territories. Then there were those who felt that the U.S. should settle race-related issues at home first, and those who thought that the Filipino immigrants would compete for American jobs. No matter what you thought, it was settled when, on February 6, 1899, the Senate approved the Treaty of Paris. The United States now had an empire that included Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. On an ending note, let's go back to the Philippines. Remember Aguinaldo, the rebel leader in the Philippines who helped fight off the Spanish? Well, instead of supporting him in independence, the United States annexed the Philippines. Betrayed, Aguinaldo led his troops into the jungles and fought a brutal war against the military government for 3 years. So now, let's take a look at America in the Philippines.